All right, Shabbos say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking all of our. One second, I'm sorry. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Iyar. To thank Stephen Terizin for dedicating all B'Shem and Joshua this month in honor of their newest grandson, Matan Shmuel Aaron. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, he will grow to be an incredible and successful Ben Torah. Ameh ve'esem shanim tovos. To thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Chaim Rothschild, the commemoration of the yahrzeit of his mother, Sarah Rivka Bas Eliezer, and Yerachmiel and Judy Nudelman, the commemoration of the yahrzeit of Yerachmiel's father, Jack Nudelman, Yaakov ben Moshe Tzvi, Zichron Livrach. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamas will have an aliyah and the families a nechama. With that, let us begin. So we have a lot to do today. In Meretz Hashem, we are picking up, and today's daf is Mem Daled 44. But we are picking. Sorry, 1 second. But we are picking up in Meretz Hashem on Mem Gimel and Beis. We are picking up in Meretz Hashem on 43b, and we are picking up the Lukma. The Lukma. It's about 20 lines up from 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, about 27 lines up from the bottom of this. Remember again, we're speaking about specifically the exemption, or I should say the ability to go back from war for the exemption of a kerem, of a vineyard. So the Gemara says, I'm sorry. So the Gemara says, why don't you set it up as dealing with a vineyard that belongs to two partners? Each partner could return for the part of the vineyard which belongs to him. This teaches us we'll say that a jointly owned vineyard is not a license to return from war. Interesting. So why is it any different than the case of 5 brothers, right? Where one of the brothers dies, and now again, each of them technically has a yibum obligation, and that yibum obligation allows them to return from the front. In the case of yibum, every man has a connection to that woman, right? Every surviving brother has a connection to that sister-in-law. But in the case of the jointly owned Karen, the jointly owned vineyard, neither party can claim that it is his vineyard in totality. What are we talking about? What's the case? We're talking about a situation where someone grafted a tree together. Yarek literally means a vegetable. In this case, ultimately, again, it means an herb. So the Gemara says as follows: if a person grafts a tree with an herb, Rabbi Shmuel says that it's mutter. Ultimately, the chum aser. Whose opinion is this? Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is of the opinion that also when it comes ultimately again to the exemption from war, he understands kerem, vineyard, in a literal sense. Hachanami nata kamashmo. So to over here he understands nata, and against the prohibition as a literal statement as well. Notea in mavrich umarkivlo. It's tafka only if one plants, but if one layers or one grafts, that is not a reason to be exempted from war. So we'll say we're just jumping around a little bit over here. If you have a yolda is a small sapling. So we'll say less than a tefach tall. Look at Rashi. Shishafal koma, it's very short. I'm talking about over here where the growth is never going to exceed a tefach in height. In such a situation like that, Rabbi, it is chayeves and arla kol shna seha. Essentially, it never leaves the status of arla. Why doesn't it leave the status of arla? The mischazia kibas shasa. Since it always has the appearance of a 1-year-old growth, the concern is that if we allow you to go ahead and eat it, what's going to happen? People are going to erroneously assume that one is permitted to consume arla. And that's only if you have like the basic, we'll call it the basic format of a vineyard, which is, or of an orchard, which is two, and one coming out on the bottom. Aval kule kerem, but if you have an entire vineyard, so to speak, that looks like this, kala isle. It has a kol, right? People know that this is just a vineyard that has stunted growth and not a first-year growth. Mace, topes arba amos l'kriyashma. We'll say a mace, if you have a corpse, literally translated, it grabs the arba amos around it for kriyashma. We'll say what that means is, not only can you not say kriyashma in direct proximity of the mace, but you can't say kriyashma within the dalit amos of the mace. We'll say we've been introduced to this concept before. Dechsiv loeg larash cherev osehu. So we'll say literally it means he who goes ahead and disparages the poor. Right? Ultimately, again, is a degradation to the one who created him. So we'll say the idea, we've seen this before in Maseches Brachos. The idea over here is we don't perform mitzvos in close proximity of the dead. Why? Because the dead don't have the ability to perform mitzvos. So it's considered to be an act of disrespect. So the Gemara says over here that when it comes to not saying Kriyat Shema in the presence of a mace, presence of the mace doesn't literally mean just right in front of the mace, but rather presence of the mace even means within Dalet Amos of the mace. Amar Rabbi Yisrael, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, Choragta hagdela ben ha'achin, asurin linase la'achin, v'mischazi kiach sayu. Very interesting. A stepsister. We'll say, technically speaking, a person can marry his stepsister, right? They're not related. So the Gemara says, however, a stepsister who grows up amongst the brothers, one cannot go ahead and marry her. Why? Because she looks like a sister. In other words, just the optics of it, because she grew up amongst her brothers, it looks like a sister. To which the Gemara says, Velohi kala isleilimo. So the Gemara says, no, it's actually not a problem. It's not a problem because there's a kol. In other words, I will say, people know who real siblings are versus step siblings. So because people know, even if technically speaking, she grew up in the house, halakha l'maaseh, the Gemara says she can still marry one of the quote-unquote brothers. Of course, that's not really her brother, right? But rather she can marry one of her step brothers. Rabbi Yisrael, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, leket shecham peah, sha'asan begoren. Well, this is actually a very interesting halakha. In general, leket, shechacha, and peah, right, are portions left for the poor. Technically speaking, anything that is left for the poor is tax exempt. It's tax exempt. Meaning what? If I'm a poor person, and I go ahead and I collect leket, shecha, and peah, I don't have to give trumas and maasros from that. Right? There's no obligation like that. However, if you went ahead and sha'asan begoren, and I both say, if halacha l'maisa, I went ahead and I piled them together. Now, if you make a pile of leket, shecha, and peah, then what I will say? See, remember, making a pile of something already has a much more, it appears as if one is harvesting. Well, if you're doing that, then hukva l'maiser, then you'd indeed have to take trumas and maisers from it. And I will say, the common denominator amongst all things that we're talking about over here are the optics of it. So the idea over here is if you took leket, shecha, and peah, it's not a din in the volume of it. It's a din in the fact that now you went ahead and you piled it, which makes it look like a normative harvest. Then you're going to be chayiv in trumas and maisers. Amar ula, lo amar ala b'sada. This is only true if you're piling it in the sada, in the field. Aval be'ir, but if you're doing this in the city, kala islay l'milsa. People know, but I guess in the city because people dwell a little bit closer together. But if you look at Rashi says hukva l'maiser midrabanan deman dechazi savar shagadol besadehu. Since you're piling it, it looks like you may have grown this stuff, and since you've grown it, right, it's your produce, and therefore midrabanan, it'll be chayv in maiser. Now the Gemara qualifies this. This is only in the field. Because people in the field don't necessarily know what's going on. In the city, where people, I guess, are probably also going ahead and living closer together, and people see that I didn't grow it, but rather, again, I'm bringing it into my home, there would be no obligation to go ahead and tithe it. Incredible. So the Gemara says as follows: Yolda hapechusa mitefach eina mikadesh es azroim. So it's an interesting case. If you have literally, again, a growth that is less than a tefach, this is talking about now kloi hakerem, right? Remember, again, the forbidden mixture between wheat and vines, right? Wheat and grapes. So what happens if you have a yolda pechusa mitefach? You have a vine that is less than a tefach. Eina mikadesh es azroim. It does not go ahead and create a problem for seeds planted nearby. Bahani mili shtayim. Rashi says, Eina mikadesh es azroim. Mishum kloi hakerem dichsiv bahu tiktash hamaleya hazera v'nearly the kasavar the kedamrina b'menachos kanvus v'luf asra Torah shar zram medabonaninu or b'chi hakerem lo gazra abonim ashar zram. Well, say since the growth is so stunted, essentially again Chazal were not gozer kloi hakerem in this type of situation. But that's only true. Bahani mili shtayim kineged shtayim v'achas yotzei zanov, where you have a case where we'll say, two vines, and one coming out on the bottom. That's like the minimum amount that represents a substantive growth. Aval kule kerem, but if you have an entire kerem like this, an entire vineyard, makdish. Indeed, it would become a problem of klaya kerem. But I just want to point out the common denominator of what you said, we run like what this is so random. It's just the same author. It's the same Tana. It's Rabbi Yitzchak near Rabbi Yochanan near Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Next case, top of Memdalid. Mace, Tofes Arba Amos Latuma. So we'll say, so before we spoke about Mace, Tofes Arba Amos L'Kriyashma, that when you have a corpse, we'll say top of 44a, Memdalid Melaf. When you have a corpse, ultimately, again, that corpse, you cannot recite Kriya Shema within Dalet Amos of that corpse. Why? Because the corpse itself, so to speak, seizes the Dalet Amos around it. So, Mem Dalet Mace Tovis Abba Amos Latuma. We'll say it's not just that, but a mace also, so to speak, takes over the Dalet Amos around it for Tumah purposes. What does this mean? Top Rashi on Mem Dalet Amadalet, writes Rashi, Chachamim Gazru, Sheyehei HaMeis Mitame Kol HaNichnas Ba'arba Amosov, Kedei Shelo Yargilu Ochlei Taros Likarivlo, Ve'esaver Shelo Hel, Ve'eshlachosh Shema Yivshot Yadav V'Yavadavadadis. Supposed to say, what's the concern over here? Technically speaking, the only time that a mace conveys Tumah is when? If you touch it, or if you have Tumas Ohel, you hover over it. Chazal came along, the rabbis came along and said, even if you are within Dalet Amos of a mace, you become Tameh. Now they did this in order to go ahead and essentially add a protective barrier. What were they concerned about? That a person's going to be eating taras, and he's not going to realize, but he's in close proximity of the mace. And I will say, remember again, how can you contract Tumas Ohel? You lean over. So just person can be in close proximity to the mace, accidentally lean over the grave, and suddenly again he's tamei tumas mace. So therefore, essentially, in order to create just a protective barrier, in order to go ahead and ensure that people don't inadvertently contract tumas mace, Chazal said you can't get within Dalet Amos of a mace. Can't get. I would say, by the way, of course, the metaphor is such a beautiful idea in general in life, right? If I have a very narrow line between right and wrong, between Tameh and Tahar, what's going to happen? You're going to contract Tumah. And I don't mean halachic Tumah, I mean like life Tumah, right? If I'm constantly straddling the line between right and wrong, then by definition, I'm going to find myself on the wrong side of that. So much of success in life is all about creating protective barriers, especially in the areas that I know in which I am weak, right? All of us have our weak spots. So dafka in those weak spots, dafka in those areas in which I struggle most is where I need my protective barriers most. I have to identify again, where do I struggle? What's the Achilles heel? And how could I say, not just I'm not gonna do it, but what are the protective barriers, the layers that I can place between myself and that hate to ensure that I'm not going to transgress? Chazal added Dalet Amos between myself and the corpse to make sure that I'm not going to become Tameh in life. It's going to sound strange, but we all have our corpse, right? We all have that Tumah. We all have that Tumah that is our greatest source of weakness. Make sure to put Dalet Amos between yourself and that mace. Incredible. The Tanatuna, we learned, Chatzar HaKever ha'omi b'soch hatar. Interesting, we'll say, what happens if there's a Chatzar HaKever? Now we'll say, look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says over here, Chatzar HaKever, shelefnei hama'ara ki da'amar seder binyan akvaris ba'basra, sh'osin ma'aros kidolos shel sheish, v'chover because that's what I say, they used to have like catacombs, like burial chambers. And in front of the burial chamber, there was a chatzar, a courtyard that led you into the burial chamber. So chatzar, the Gemara says, so chatzar HaKever ha'omi b'soch hatar, if you stand in the chutzner, in the courtyard of the kever, you're tar. Beishamai says that's assuming that there's dalet amas in that kever. I'm sorry, in that chutzner. If there's dalet amas in that chutzner, ultimately, again, you are going to go ahead and be tar. Now, we'll say, now what's the logic? Rashi says over here, ha'omi b'socho tar, komakum shu omid bat tar, techivan dema'ara chaluka heimena u'mechitzoseni karos, so listen to this. The logic behind it is, since the catacomb itself, the actual area where the graves are, is separate and distinct, with its own mechitzas, with its own wall, the chutzner is viewed as a separate area. So because the chutzner is viewed as a separate area, if you stand there, you are tahar. Now, Beishamai says that's all provided that Allah said the chutzner has dalet amas. Because if the chutzner has dalet amas, then what? It's considered to be its own distinct area as well. So Beisila says not dalet amas for tfachim. But essentially, what Bro say, Bisham and Beisila are agreeing in what? They're agreeing that if you stand in the chutzner, you're not tamei, as long as the chutzner is considered to be a chashuv, right, halachically important area on its own. So now the machlokas is what makes an area defined and important on its own. Beis Shammai says it's got to have an area of dalet amas. Beis Hillel says all it needs is an area of dalet tfachim. Fine. So the Gemara says, when is this true? Right? When is this so? Right? The Gemara says, this is when the entranceway to the catacomb below is above. Now we'll say, now what does that mean? Look at Rashi. Shin knisas madron b'malos minatzad ela kishiyardin la kovtzin la ukishaolim misocha metapes va'ola. So I'll say, interesting enough, there are two ways apparently that you used to enter into these subterranean catacombs. One was essentially there'd be just like a hole in the ground, and you would lower yourself in and climb out. The other was stairs that would go down from the side. So the Gemara says, so ultimately again, the Gemara says, so Beis Hillel says, when is this so? When ultimately again, when the entrance to the catacomb is from the top just going down. But ultimately again, if there's an entrance way to the side, meaning stairs that lead you down, Divrei Hakol, everyone agrees, arba amos, that you would need at least an area of 4 amos. In other words, in the chutzner, in order for the chutzner to be considered its own separate and distinct area. To which the Gemara says, I don't understand, klapelaya, adarabba. I would say just the opposite. Minat sad, when the entranceway to the catacomb is on the side, so I'll say on the side means it's a slope. There are stairs leading down into the subterranean catacomb. Minatzad, so midrad vinafik. So I'll say, here's the difference. When it's on the side, clearly because it's stairs leading down, that means the chutzner is distinct from the graves, right? So think about this. You have the chutzner, and then what? You're taking stairs into the catacomb, which tells you that where is the catacomb? In a separate area from the chutzner. So it makes much more sense to say in that situation there's not a problem of tumah. However, again, milamala, if literally the entranceway to the catacomb is just like a hole in the ground and you're just going in, what does that mean? The chutzner is situated right on top of the catacomb. That should be a problem of tumah. When is this so? So I'll say, when is this so? Ultimately, again, that as long as the chutzner has a certain requisite area, you're not going to contract tumah. That's when the entranceway to the catacomb is on the side. But everyone agrees that if the entranceway is on top, i.e. it's just a hole and you descend down, arba amos, that the chutzner must have a minimum amount of 4 amos. So I was about to say, even Beis Hillel, who says that the chutzner only needs to be 4 tfachim in order for the person standing there not to contract tumah, that's only in a situation where halacha l'maaseh, the entranceway to the catacomb is on the side, and therefore you could stand on the chutzner or in the chutzner without standing on top of the graves. But if the entranceway is just straight down, right, then even Beis Hillel would agree that the chatzar has to be at least daled amos in order for you not to contract tumah. Incredible. So the Gemara says, "V'hani nili chatzar kever demesaima mechitzasa." I'll say, but even this is so. Even all of this is only with a chatzar, with a defined kever, Ava mace ba'alma, but just stam a mace, or just stam, you have a body that's buried somewhere, or even a body that's not buried somewhere. Gemara says, Ava mace ba'alma, toughest. But a mace ultimately, again, by itself, halacha so will always seize the dalid amas around it. And I will say that is indeed how we paskin both the Kriyas Shema as well as for Tumah. That if you have a body, whether that body is buried or unburied, that body exerts its influence, so to speak, within the Dalet Amos around. So you would not be permitted to say Kriyas Shema within Dalet Amos of a mace, and ultimately, again, there would be rabbinic Tumah within Dalet Amos of a mace as well. Okay, incredible. We'll say back to our sugya. Mia ish asher aras isha. So must remember again, one of the exemptions was a man who went ahead and did erisin, but didn't get to nisuin. Right, he didn't live with his wife. So what's the halacha? He goes back. So Tan Rabbanon, Aras, so Asher Aras, Echad HaMa'aris is HaBasula, V'echad HaMa'aris is Almana. So we'll say this is true, whether he had Erusin with a Basula, or Erusin with an Almana, V'echad Shomer Sevam, or for that matter, even again, Shomer Sevam, he's going to marry his widowed sister-in-law. V'afilu Chamisha Achin Umeis Echad Milchama, and we'll say, we just mentioned this before, even if you have 5 brothers, right, and one of them, Chas Shalom, died in war, Kulan Chosr, and they all go back. What's the reason they all go back? Because they're all considered to be someone, so to speak, who has erisin, right, for the Shomeres Yavam. So the Gemara says, right, Kulan Chosr, Lo Lakach, but Shabbos says, so remember again, the pasuk is, just the pasuk the Gemara is quoting is, Mia ish asher aras isha, velo likacha. Who is the man who betrothed the woman, but lo likacha did not take her, did not do nisuin, he didn't live with her. So the Gemara just points out, it doesn't say lo lakach, but rather it says lo likacha. He did not take her. So prat li almana lekohen gadol, ugrusha v'chalutza lekohen hedyot, mamzeres unesina li yisrael basra mamzerasan. So what is this? Why does the Torah employ this lashon? Lo likacha means he did not yet do nisuin with her, and nisuin with her would be legal nisuin. What does this come to exclude? This comes to exclude, right, a Kohen Gadol who did Kiddushin with an Almana, or a regular Kohen who did Kiddush with a Grusha V'chalutza, or a Mamzeres, or an Asina Yisrael. So we'll say it comes to exclude in a legal marriage. To which the Gemara is limited lo Rabbi Yossi Aglili. So I'll say apparently this is not Rabbi Yossi Aglili. It's the same conversation we had yesterday. What does Rabbi Yossi Aglili say? Rabbi Yossi Aglili ha'amar hayare v'rach halevav zeha mesar me'aver shadar. We're going to see this is our next Mishnah. Rabbi Yossi Aglili is the opinion who says that when the Torah says if you're afraid of what? Afraid of averus. So I'll say according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, in these cases you should be able to go back. So let's play this out. In other words, we just said when the pasuk says asher lekacha, what the Torah is saying is, you only go back for a wife who you are permitted to marry. But if you're not permitted to marry the wife, you don't go back. So the Gemara says, this stands in contradiction to Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Because Rabbi Yossi Aglili is the one who says that if you are scared about your averos, you can go back from war. Now we'll say, this is a situation of an avera. A Kohen Gadol who did Kiddushin with an Almana, or a Kohen Hedyot who did Kiddushin with a Grusha or a Chalutza. This is an avera. They should be able to go back. Yet the Gemara says, no, they can't go back for such a situation like this. So obviously it doesn't reflect the view of Rabbi Yossi Aglili, to which the Gemara says, no. Afela Tema Rabbi Yossi Aglili Kidirabba. Damarabba, the Olam Eno Chayiv Ad Sheyivol. So both say this is fascinating. Rabba holds that in cases of illegal marriage, it's fascinating. When do you transgress, right, the performance of an illegal marriage or engaging in illegal marriage? Only after relations. Interesting. So in other words, the act of kiddushin in an illegal marriage is not the avera. It's the act of relations, the act of bia. The Gemara says, why does the Torah say ultimately you can't take this woman? Mishum lo yichalal. Ultimately, again, because it profanes the offspring. Therefore, mishum hachi eno loka achival. Since the whole issue with an illegal marriage is what? profanation of offspring. That is a brand new word, right? Brand new word, right? Profanation, I think, is a brand new word. Right? Profaning offspring, right? Called profanation, right? So Lamaisa again, so Lamaisa, therefore, the Isra is only when there's Bia. So I'll say this is actually quite fascinating. So let's clear this out. So now you have, right, the soldiers are ready for war. You have a Kohen who is there, and this Kohen betrothed, did Kiddushin with a Grusha, a divorcee. Illegal. So now the Gemara is saying he can't go back on grounds of marriage, right? Why can't he go back more on grounds of marriage? Why not? Because the only time you're allowed to go back for grounds of marriage is for a legal marriage. Says the Gemara, but he should be able to go back because of Aveira. We're going this way. Rabbi Yosef Lili says if he's afraid of his Aveira, he should be able to go back because of an Aveira. To which the Gemara says, technically no, he hasn't committed an Aveira yet. Like Rabbi says, why? When is the Aveira for an illegal marriage committed? When it's consummated. Bia, relations. It's interesting. The act of Kiddushin itself is not the Aveira. It's the act of consummation of the marriage relations. Bia, that's the Aveira. Quite incredible. Tan Rabbanan. Let's analyze. Tan Rabbanan. Both say we are now on Memdal and Medalef. Rashi, remember, again, is on both sides of this page. So if you look at Rashi on the left-hand column, where you see the big Masnisin there, that Rashi, we are right across from there in the Gemara. Tan Rabbanan. So let's analyze. Most of the Gemara teaches us. Tan Rabbanan. Asher bana, asher nata, asher aras. So we'll say this is an incredible Gemara. The Gemara says as follows. When you look at the list of exemptions, right? What's the order of the exemptions? Who is the person who built a home? Who is the person who planted a vineyard? Who is the person who got married? So I'll say these are the list of exemptions. So the Gemara says, Limda Torah derech haretz. I will say, the Torah could have employed any order. It's interesting that the order is, who is the guy who built a house? Who is the guy who planted a vineyard? Who is the guy who married a woman? So what do you see from here? Limda Torah derech haretz, sheyivna adam bayis, v'yita kerem, v'achar kach yisa isha. An interesting order, right? What's the proper order for life? First, the person should go out and build a house, right? Have a place to live. Then a person should plant a vineyard, have a parnasa. And then after you have a house, and after you have a parnasa, then you should get married. Okay. Sotah Shlomo said, Hachein b'chutz melachtecha v'ateta b'sadalach achar ubanisa b'sechas. What's here? I was quoting from the pasuk in Mishlei. So literally translated means Hachein b'chutz melachtecha. Prepare your parnasa, your livelihood on the outside. Va'atata b'sada, prepare yourself or busy yourself with your field. Achar ubaniso beisecha. Then after all of that, you will build your home. The Gemara says, Hachin b'chutz melachtecha, prepare your malacha. That's bayis. That refers to the building of a home. Va'atata b'sadalach, and busy yourself in the field. Zekerem, that refers to your vineyard, i.e. your parnasa. Ubanisa beischa, build your home. Zoisha, that refers to wife. So I was saying, so I want to point out, it's fascinating. In other words, okay, so the truth is, it's kind of intuitive. In other words, right, have a place to live, make money, and then get married. That way you could support your wife. Okay, let's say on a deeper level, what it also means is as follows. In a marriage, we all know this, right? We all know this, that sometimes one of the greatest stressors are finances. Right? Nothing could destroy shalom bayis like stress over finances. So I will say what the Gemara is also saying is sometimes if a person enters into marriage with a financial plan, then ultimately, again, that gives them a better probability, ultimately, of going ahead and building proper shalom bayis. Again, let's say it is interesting, by the way, how some of these things which seemed so obvious for Chazal are so foreign to us now, which is just again, it's just society. It's just societally how things shift in such fascinating ways. And okay, good. Let's go weiter. So Gemara says, Davar acher, hachin b'chutz melachtecha. Ultimately, again, prepare your malach on the outside. What does this mean? Zem mikra. This refers to chumash. Va'atata b'sadalach, and busy yourself in the field. Zem mishnah. So the Gemara says, achar ubanisa b'sech. Then afterwards, build your home. Ze Gemara. So we'll say another homiletic interpretation. First learn chumash, then learn mishnah, and then learn Gemara. Davar achar, hachin b'chutz malachtecha. Go ahead and literally prepare, right? Prepare on the outside your work. Zeh mikra u'mishnah. That refers to Chumash and Mishnah. Va'atata b'sada lecha. That refers to Gemara. Achar u'banisa b'secha. Then build your home. Elu maisim tovim. Beautiful. That refers to good deeds. That refers to good deeds. In other words, Rabbi say it's such a beautiful idea, right? Your malacha, right? Begin with your malacha, your work. That's mikra. That's Chumash and Mishnah. Plow your field, right? That's ultimately Gemara, and build your home. Rabbi say that's maisim tovim. That's good deeds. See, learning is not an ends. Learning is a means to engaging in beautiful, dynamic activity. That's called the building of your home. So do your work, plow your field, that's all of your Torah. And then build your home, that's your Maisim Tovim. That's your good deeds. So beautiful. Rabbi Eliezer ben Shabi Yosef Lili Omer, Hachin b'chutz malachtecha, prepare your malacha on the outside. Zem mikra mishnah u'gimara. Interesting. That's Torah. Chumash mishnah gemara. Va'atata b'sada lecha. That refers ultimately again to your maisim tovim, good deeds. Achro banisa v'secha. Then go ahead and build your home. Drosh v'kabel schar. So what is drosh v'kabel schar? That means look for even deeper meaning in your learning. Right, so I'll say what that means is absolutely beautiful. What's the pshat in this last one? So I'll say in this last one, you have hachin b'chutz malachtecha, right? Prepare your work on the outside. That refers to Torah. Mikra, Mishnah, Gemara. Atata b'sada, plow your field. That's maisim tovim. And then build your home. Look for deeper meaning in your learning. In other words, they're both saying, what is it saying? Always go for more. In other words, in the previous drasha, where kind of does it end? It ends at maisim tovim, right? You have Mikra, Mishnah, Gemara, learn your Torah, allow your Torah to manifest itself in dynamic life activity, and that's the finish line. In this last drasha, I was saying, there's never a finish line. What do? You learn your Torah, you use your Torah to create maisim tovim, and after you've learned Torah and done maisim tovim, then what? Drosh v'kabel schar. Look for deeper meaning in your Torah as well. Or in other words, you're never done. You're never done. I will say, people often ask, right, what's the finish line? Simple answer is, there is no finish line. Now, there's a time in which you're finished running the race, right? When do you finish running the race? That's after 120. You're finished running the race. But at no point in time in life do you ever cross the finish line. Now, again, you may, I'll say, it's like, I guess the best mushal is like the car races, right? Like the what do they call the car? Like NASCAR, right? Right, like NASCAR, right? In other words, you have laps, right? So in other words, in life, you finish like laps, right? Okay, Mazel Tov, you finish lap number 1. You finish that. In other words, there are increments of completion, but in terms of when you finish the race is never finished. Even after 120. Usually the race isn't finished. It's just someone stopped you in the race, right? Okay, you're done. You're done with the laps. Did I finish everything? I don't know. Maybe yes, maybe no. But I will say, such an incredible yisod. So after you do your mikra, your mishnah, your gemara, after you do your maisim tovim, you might have thought, I finished. No, drosh v'kabel schar. Drosh v'kabel schar means what's next. What's more? How can you look for something deeper? How can you look for something greater? How can you look for something more expansive? Drosh v'kabel schar represents the ongoing journey in spiritual development. Incredible. And so we'll say these are the people who do not return for more. So we'll say, remember again, then the Gemara gave examples, ultimately again, for example, of buildings, structures that are not domicile worthy, and therefore again, one can't return from the war for them. One of the examples we'll say, someone who knocks down a home and rebuilds the exact house. You don't return back for war from that. The Gemara says, however, Tana im hosif bo dimos echad chozer. If you add on one row of bricks, right, or one row of stones, either in height or in width. In other words, if you knock down your house and you rebuild the same structure, but you make a wall a little taller, a wall a little thicker, that's called a new structure, and that would allow you to return for more. Rabbi Eliezer said, even if you build a brick home in the Sharon region, you don't return back for more from that. Why not? We'll say first white line, Tana, because we spoke on this in Rashi already, because Lamais, again, the earth in the Sharon region was not good for making bricks, right? It was not good for making bricks, and therefore, again, any structure you made from Sharonian bricks would crumble. They would have to rebuild their home twice every 7 years, once every 3.5 years. Shalomai because of that, it wasn't really called damasal worthy, and therefore you cannot return for war from that. Ve'elu shein zazim imkoman, banabayis chalash chalash. But then remember again, third category are people who don't even leave their homes. So remember again, in category number 2, right? Category number 1 is everyone who comes out to war. Category number 2 are the exemptions. In the cases of the exemptions, the guy married a woman but did not yet live with her, built a home, didn't live in it, planted a vineyard, didn't yet partake of it. Everybody's going out to war, right? And at the border, when the Mashiach Muhammad gives his first speech and lists all of the exemptions, what do? They go home. And what do they do when they go home? What do? They support the war efforts, right? With food, with drink, with roads, fine. Third category are people who do not even come out. Like that's the guy who married a woman and he's in Shana Rishona, first year of marriage. Built a home, Shana Rishona. Partaking of a vineyard, Shana Rishona, first year. These guys, they don't even come out. Right? They don't even come out. They don't even report for duty. So turn on, Isha Chadasha, a new wife, Ainli Elech Isha Chadasha. Ainli Rabbi say, so Chadasha sounds like a basula. Right? Amana Grusha Minai. How do we know that if a man married a widow or a divorcee, the same halacha applies. If he's in Shana Rishona the first year, right, the first year of his marriage to a widow or to a divorcee, he doesn't have to go to war. Talmud Lomar, Isha Mikol Makom. Pasuk says Isha, and came out Talmud Lomar, Isha Chadasha. So why does the Pasuk say a new wife? Misha Chadasha lo. It means a new wife for him. I was supposed to say, even though someone has been married before, she's a new wife for him. Yatsa machzir grushaso she'en chadashalo. This comes to exclude what case? Machzir grushaso. A man remarries his divorcee. If you remarry your divorcee, that's not an excuse not to go to war. Both say again, Memdalif in the wide lines, third line in the wide lines, halfway through the line. Tanabanon lo yetze batzav. He doesn't go out to war. Yachal batzav lo yetze vayaspik mayim u'mazon v'itakin adrachim. So I'll say. So again, remember, we're talking about these people who are in the midst of Shana Rishona, first year of marriage, first year of new house, first year of new vineyard. So the Torah says they don't go out to war. I might have thought they don't go out to war in the army, but they help the war effort at home, right? Talmud Lomar, v'lo ya'avor alav l'chol davar. No, he's not involved in anything. Not involved in anything. Yochal shanimar be'af habone bayis v'lo chancho, not aker v'lo chillo, ares ish v'lo lekacha. I might have thought, therefore, to apply this same halacha, we'll say to a man who betrothed the woman but didn't yet marry her, built a home but didn't yet live in it, planted a vineyard but didn't yet partake of it. Maybe these guys don't go out to war and don't help out in the war effort either. Talmud Lomar alav. Therefore, the pasuk says not only on this guy, the aforementioned guy. Alav yatamavir aval atamavir alachirim. So we'll say it's only on this unique individual, right? These three individuals: Shana Rishona of marriage, Shana Rishona of new house, Shana Rishona of new vineyard. These are the guys who don't even come out at all. But everyone else goes out to war, is returned home because they have an exemption and supports the war effort from home. After the pasuk says, don't place any responsibility on him. Why does it say don't go out in war? To teach Rabbi say that if he does go out, ultimately again he's in violation of two prohibitions. So Rabbi say, so it turns out that halacha l'maisa, we pretty much have these three categories of people. We'll call it regular guys who go out to war. Regular guys who go out to war, right? Category number 2 are people who have a man who has betrothed the woman, right? Kiddushin, but no nisuin, hasn't lived with her. Built a home, hasn't lived in it. Planted a vineyard, hasn't partaken of it. These guys go out to war, right? Up until the border, and then they're turned back. Then they go home. They go home. Now we'll say, once they go home, what do? They support the war effort from home. Third category is a guy who's in Shana Rishona, first year of marriage, first year of living in a new home, first year partaking of a new vineyard. These individuals, they don't go out. They don't go out. They stay put. They don't go out. And not only that, they have they don't have any obligations upon them. They do not even work to support the war effort at home. Fine. One more piece to this. Mishnah. Was it incredible? So we'll say, so the officers continued to go ahead and speak to the nation. And we'll say, what did they say? They said, Mia ish hayare v'rach alevav. Who is the person who is afraid and soft of heart? Go home. Go home. Okay, so I'll say, so now this is now another category of exemptions. If you're afraid or soft of heart. Rabbi Kiva says, so we'll say, what does it mean? Rabbi Kiva says, Rabbi Kiva says, you don't need to interpret this in any deeper way. What does it mean to be afraid? What does it mean to be afraid? He's afraid. He's afraid. We'll say again, he's unable to stand in battle and unable to see an unsheathed sword. Right? The guy is just, again, he's just afraid. He's afraid of war. Rabbi Yosef Omer, no. Incredible. Rabbi Yosef says no. What is he afraid of? He's afraid that he does not possess the requisite merit to be successful on the battlefield. He is afraid of the averos shebiyado. Right? He's afraid of the averos that he has. Right? Lefichach tilsalo Torah is called elu shechser b'glon. So it's incredible. Rabbi Yosef Lili says, this is the, remember again, there's an order. Right? So we'll say, what's the order? First, we talk about the exemptions for a guy who built a house, right? Who married a woman, built a house, planted a vineyard. Then we say, if you're scared. What's the great part? When you go home, no one knows why you're going home. I mean, your buddies might know why you're going home. They're like, hey, you didn't just get married. You didn't build a house. You didn't plant a vineyard. Right? So I guess by process of elimination, so again, but stam, people are not going to know why it is that you're going home. That way you have cover. You have cover. Let's say you see from here, by the way, how important it is to go ahead and, right, protect a person's dignity. Right? Important just to protect the person's covet. Rabbi Yossi says, Amar lekohen gadol, grusha v'chalutz lekohen hedyot, mamzer sunasin liyisrael, bas Yisrael mamzer ulanasin. Harehu hayar v'rach halevav. So we'll say Rabbi Yossi seems to be giving examples of averos. His examples are illegal marriages. He says this is an example of someone who would be afraid because of the averos he possesses. The Gemara is going to ask what exactly is the difference between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yossi Haglili. We'll discuss this. So that's the exemption. That's the exemption ultimately again for averos. For averos. So again, the Gemara says, so we'll say now that the Shotrim finished their whole drasha. So we'll say, so now the speaking part, right? The pre-war drashas are over. Now what happens? They would set up officers in the front of the nation and in the back of the nation. So what happens? So the Gemara says, Paktu sorry, Tzivos Rosham Ubakerusham. Mamidin Zikifin Lifnehem, Vacharehem, Vachirim Meacharehem, Ukshilin Shal Barzel Biadein. So let's listen to this. They would go ahead and they would put strong officers in the front, and we're going to see the point of the strong officers in the front was that if soldiers fell, they would pick them back up, right? Literally and figuratively. Literally pick them up and give them chizuk. Now they would also station officers on the back of the army. Why? They had iron clubs in their hands. And I will say, if somebody tried to run away from the army, the guys in the back would literally, again, club them in the feet, club them in the legs. I will say, so pretty intense. Why? The Gemara says, Amud Beis, Shetchilas, Nisa Nefila. Ultimately, we'll say why. Now, literally translated, it means the beginning of running away is downfall. We're going to see exactly what that phrase means. Shnei Amar, Nas Yisrael Lifnei Plishtim, V'gam Hagefa Gidol Ha'isa Ba'am. U'la'alanu Omer, V'yanusu Anshe Yisrael Mipnei Plishtim, V'yiplu Chalalim. In other words, we're both saying, if the army begins to run away, that is the beginning of the defeat of the nations. Therefore, I both say it's incredible. In other words, you had an opportunity to leave. Just to be clear, right? Every soldier had an opportunity to leave. So that's why, again, that's why that last one, if you're afraid and you don't want to fight, we don't want you there. We absolutely do not want you there, right? But Lamaisa, once you're there, you're there. And I will say, again, for the benefit of the army in totality, no deserters. You cannot run away. And if you try to run, we're essentially going to cut off your legs. Right? That's essentially what happens, right? You're going to get clubbed in the legs, and that's it. Why? We'll say, this is an incredible episode. You say to yourself, poor guy, he's scared, he's getting clubbed in the legs. We'll say, sometimes the needs of the collective outweigh the needs of the individual. I understand you're scared, but right now the army needs to win the battle. And if your buddies see you running away, it's going to be detrimental to the war effort. So if it means you're going to cut off your legs, right, club your legs, that's it. That's what we'll say. The needs of the collective outweigh the needs of the individual. So the Gemara goes back to when is this so? I'm going to say now, when is what so? I will say, when is it so that you have all of these exemptions from battle, right? Whether it's the guy who went ahead and built the house, got married, built the vineyard, right, planted the vineyard, all this stuff. The Melchemes HaRashus. I will say, this is incredible. This is all talking about optional wars. We'll talk about that in a moment. So the Gemara says, "Aval Melchemes Mitzvah." I will say, when it is an obligatory war, everyone goes to war. Hakol Yotzin. Afilu Chasan Mechedra V'Kala Michupasa. Even the Chasan from his bridal canopy. The expression Kala Michupasa is not literal, because again, in the Jewish army, women did not historically go out to war. So it's just an expression. It's an expression that everyone goes out to battle. Maharsha says what it means is Kala Michupasa means that the women would be involved in the war. They would be supporting the war effort, again, from a logistical perspective, but not actually fighting the battles. I'm Rabbi Yehuda. When is this so? The Melchemes Mitzvah. Melchemes Chova, Hakol Yotzna, Afilu Chasem Echadro, Kal Mechupasa. So Rabbi Yehuda used a different lashon. He says, when is this so that there are exemptions? Ultimately, again, a Melchemes Mitzvah. But when it comes to an obligatory war, everyone goes out. So we'll discuss the difference in the Lashonos. Right? We'll see they're in fact saying the same thing, just using different phraseology. So I will say a really incredible and fascinating Mishnah, but just kind of going back, this concept of exemptions only applies to what we'll call optional wars. Optional wars. The Melchemes Mitzvah, which is an obligatory war, ultimately, again, everyone goes out. It doesn't matter, you marry, you know, no differences, no exemptions from Melchemes. So let's analyze. So we'll say, my Ika ben Rabbi Yossi. So let's remember again, going back in the Mishnah. The Mishnah was speaking about a person who is exempt from war because he's Yareh and Rach Levav. He's afraid. He's afraid. So the Gemara said, Rabbi Yossi said, what is he afraid of? He's afraid of his Averos. Averos Shebiyado. Then Rabbi Yossi said, for example, Rabbi Yossi said, like a Kohen married to Grusha V'Chalutza. Kohen Gadol married to an Almana. You saw married, so we'll say, they seem to be saying the same thing. What's the disagreement? So we'll say, listen to this. Ika benayu avera d'Rabbanan. Wow. We'll say, you know what they're arguing about? For example, an avera d'Rabbanan. Now we'll say, what does that mean? See, if you notice, by the way, let's work backwards. Rabbi Yossi gave examples of what? Averos d'Oraisa. A Kohen Gadol marrying an Almana. Kohen Hedyot marrying Grusha V'Chalutza. Those are Averos d'Oraisa. According to Rabbi Yossi, the only type of Avera which would preclude you from going to war is an Avera d'Oraisa. According to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, even if you're worried about your Averos d'Rabbanan, you would not go out to war. Now, I just want to point out, you read this, and what do you think to yourself? This army probably didn't have a mezuman, right? Let's say, I don't understand, right? This is the criteria for going out to war? Yes. Who's scared of the Averos? I'm scared of my Averos, right? Forget my, I'm not even up to my Dirabanans, right? I'm still worried about my Da'oraisas. So who is going out to war? So Rabbi say, look at the lashon of the Mishnah. What does Rabbi Yossi say? He says, who is the person who is afraid? Min Averos Shebiyado. They will say, what does Shebiyado mean? What does Shebiyado mean? You're holding on to them. In other words, we're talking about a person. There's a very easy way for me to deal with my Averos. What is it called? Tshuva. And what does Tshuva do? Rabbi say, Tshuva removes Averos. Averos Shebiyado means my problem is not that I've done Averos. We've all done Averos. The problem is Averos Shebiyado. Averos that I'm holding on to, that I'm still doing, that I have not done tshuva for. That's where the problem comes up. That's about where I'm still holding on to it. It's Averos Shebiyado. Shebiyado says, you have Averos Shebiyado. I don't know. You got to really think about it. Is it a good idea for you to be part of the fighting army? Is it a good idea for you to go out to war or not? That you did Averos? All of us do Averos. But I will say, what's my goal? In the immediate aftermath of an Avera, what should I be doing? Tshuva. And I will say, by the way, tshuva on its most basic level is a cognitive, emotional process. I'm sorry that I did this. I should not have done it. I regret that I did it, and I'm going to be better going forward. Boom. That's tshuva. That's tshuva. So if you've done your tshuva, you'll feel confident going out to battle. The challenge is with the guy who's living life with averos shebiyado. You're holding on to this stuff, and you're not rectifying it. I'm holding on to it, and I'm not going through the process of tshuva. So if I'm holding on to averos shebiyado, and not doing tshuva, I'm just holding on to those behaviors, it may be a good idea not to go out to Rabbi. Say incredible. All that Kadosh Baruch Hu asks is do tshuva, right? Recognize what you've done, own it, have remorse for having done it, and pledge to do better in the future. That's it. If you do that, slate is wiped clean, you are ready to go. But Aver Shabiyado, you want to hold on to your sins. You're not willing to give them up. You're not willing to do tshuva. And Achnar Yosef Lili says, turn around and go back home. So the Gemara says, come on, all the time. What's an example? Whose opinion is reflected here? We'll say, get ready for this. Sach, bein tefillah l'tefillah. If you speak when putting on your tefillin, the person speaks between putting on their tefillin shal yad and their tefillin shal rosh, the hand tefillin and the head tefillin, Avera hu biyado, this is an avera, the choser aleh me'ar chal mochava. I will say this is the type of an avera, that's what? Don't go to war. Wow. If you talk while putting on your tefillin, that is the type of avera for which you should not go out to battle. Kiman, I will say whose opinion is reflected there? That's Rabbi Yossi Lili. Because we'll say again, that would make sense, because according to Rabbi Yossi, you need like real averos da'oraisa. Rabbi Yossi Lili says, no, even averos d'Rabbanan are enough to allow you to go home. So we'll say, halacha l'maisa, if you speak between putting on tefillin shehad, tefillin shal rosh, ultimately, again, that's enough to go ahead and turn you around. We'll come back to that in just a moment. Tana, once I finish the practice, I want to tell you something about that very quickly. So, man tanalu tan rabbanon, shama called kronos v'yarsia. We'll say a person heard the horns of the opposing army and he got scared. Hagafas trisin v'yarsia, he heard the clanking of the shields, he got scared. Tzich tzuch v'charavos. Here's the clatter, right? The glitter of the swords. And ultimately, again, umayim shosis lo al birkab. And literally, again, he soils himself. Right, he soils himself because he's so scared. Choser, go back home. So Kiman, who's that like? Let me Rabbi Akiva, but Rabbi Yosef Lili. Both say it's Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Akiva is the one who said that Yare and Rachal Lebav literally means what? A guy who's scared. To which the Gemara says, no. But Hafi Rabbi Yosef Lili Modi. Even Rabbi Yosef Lili would agree in that case that you should go home. Why? Mishum dichsibelo yamas es levav echav kilvavo. Even Rabbi Yosef Lili says, we'll say, if a guy is mamish scared, to the point that literally, again, he can't take the noise of the opposing army. He's soiling himself because he's so scared. Even Rabbi Yosef Lili agrees, go home. Why? Because you are a detriment to the war effort, right? Remember again, soldiers have to inspire confidence in one another, and this guy clearly does not do that. So I'll say, hi, the phrase I will say shouldn't be because the beginning of fleeing is downfall. Rather, it should be what? The beginning of downfall is fleeing. To which the Gemara says, you're right. I will say, by the way, is that not a profound statement? Right? The beginning of downfall is fleeing. I will say it's not just true in war, but it's true in life as well. The beginning of life downfall is when you run away from your problems and challenges. It's so hard to confront sometimes the demons that we have. It's so hard to confront the skeletons in the closet. And it's hard to confront the life challenges we have. And it's so tempting to run. But just know, the Gemara says, Tchilas nefila nisa. The beginning of downfall, the beginning of defeat is ultimately running away. It's not just true in war, but ultimately true in life as well. So we'll say, so remember in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yochanan, Rishus to Rabbanan, Zoe Mitzvah Rabbi Yehuda. I will say they're saying the same thing, just using different words. A Mechemes Rishus of the Rabbanan, that's what Rabbi Yehuda calls a Mechemes Mitzvah. Mitzvah de Rabbanan, the Mechemes Mitzvah of the Rabbanan, Zoe Chov Rabbi Yehuda. That's called the obligatory word of Rabbi Yehuda. So we'll say, we'll give examples. Mechemes Yoshua Lechavesh Lichbosh Devria Kol Chova. Everyone agrees. For example, when Yoshua came into Eretz Yisrael and conquered the land, everyone agrees That's a milchemes mitzvah, or what we'll call an obligatory war, right? Based David l'Rvacha, when David HaMelech wanted to expand the territorial borders of Eretz Yisrael, that's rishus, optional. Ki pligi, both is fascinating. Where's the machlokes? Limi ute ovdei kochavim telo leisi alayhu. I will say, here is the machlokes. What about a proactive offensive war to minimize surrounding enemies, right? An offensive war to minimize enemies. So I will say, ultimately, what do you call that? Mar kari le mitzvah. One called that a milchemes mitzvah, because again, these are enemies of Klal Yisrael. You're just proactively eliminating them. Umar kari rishus, and one calls it an optional war. Nafkamina lo'osik b'mitzvah shapata min mitzvah. I will say nafkamina would be, right, if you're engaged in this type of battle, are you pata from other mitzvahs? So I will say, so bottom line for our purposes, halacha l'maisa, the exemptions that we're talking about are all in what we'll call a milchemes rishus. That's the lexicon we use. That's the verbiage we use. A milchemes rishus. Milchemes rishus means it's a war that is waged with the permission of Beis Din of the Sanhedrin, but it's not a war commanded by God. David HaMelech wants to expand the territorial borders of Eretz Yisrael. That's fine, right? That's called a milchemes rishus. That's where all the exemptions sit in. But milchemes mitzvah, like a war against Amalek, a war to conquer Eretz Yisrael, that everyone goes to battle. I will say just very quickly in the negative 1 minute that we have. I will say, what's the pshat with the fact that talking between tefillin shal and tefillin shal rosh ultimately is a reason to go back from battle? What's the pshat with that? So Rabbi Soloveitchik explains this idea very beautifully. See, tefillin, the beauty of tefillin is it's the connection between thought and action. I will say many times in life we have beautiful ideas, goals, aspirations, hashkafas. What's the problem? They live in my head, but they don't materialize in my actions. So I'll say the goal of tefillin is a linkage between thought and action. I have to live what I believe. It's not enough in life to have beliefs. You have to actually live those beliefs. You believe in something, you have certain hashkafas, you have certain ideals. Those have to find expression in the way you live your life. What's the problem with a guy who speaks between tefillin shayan and tefillin shal rosh? There's a disconnect between what he believes and how he lives. A disconnect between his shal yad and his shal rosh. I have my beliefs, but my beliefs are not manifest in the way that I live. Kadosh Baruch Hu says, there's a disconnect between the way you think and the way you live. Better not to go out to battle. Better for you to stay home. On the front, in the war, in the battle, we need people who are consistent, who live their ideals, who live their beliefs, and whose very ideals and beliefs are manifest in the way that they practice, in the way that they live each and every day. That's a soldier. That's a person who's going to be successful in the battlefield, and that's ultimately, again, the person we need on the front lines. Rabbi say, Hadron Alach Mashuach Melchama, Shkoyach.